AI Game Changers podcast with Luke Wibbs.
I guess the first question is, where do we need to start this conversation so people listening will really understand you, your background, and how all of this started for you?
All right, yeah, I would say the starting point of my entrepreneurial journey already originated in my childhood. So it started when I was like 12, 13 years old, and my brother and I, we basically assembled and sold gaming PCs to people in our environment, mostly friends. And that was like the first time that I kind of thought, okay, it's nice to do a business, to build and sell things. Then throughout my university studies as well, I always tried to pursue some entrepreneurial path. Unfortunately, I never met the right co-founder who also had a good idea that I would be hyped about until I came to Munich, where I met Vlad, my co-founder and CTO, who's like really, really hyped about this entire brain-computer interface space, so the neurotechnology, and luckily also brings really a lot of expertise in the field of AI and machine learning. And we quickly had this super good vibe where we understood each other well, and at the same time had the same hype about the technology that we were working on. And at the same time, we also saw that there's a really nice niche where we can actually build a product that solves the problem for the customers. And that was when I started studying in Munich for informatics and management in the master. And quickly I realized, okay, the potential of our idea and the customer feedback that we got was so huge that we decided to, okay, let's drop our jobs and studies completely and go full time on our startup.
Yeah, man. And obviously we can kind of dive into that in a lot more detail, but I just want to go back to when you started your first business with your brother when you was a kid. I mean, where do you think that comes from? Because most kids are just out there playing football and just having fun, right? And so where did the entrepreneurial piece come from for you? Like, was your parents entrepreneurs, or is it something that you were born with, or where do you think that come from?
Yeah, definitely it comes from the parents. I guess they mostly shape the personality of their children, right? So my mom, she was an entrepreneur herself, so she had a big office for translating documents, any types of documents. So we are based in Germany, and she can speak Russian as well. So we have German, have Russian. And back at the time, there were a lot of Russians coming to Germany, and she would translate all the documents and build in a huge office in a short amount of time. But then when she got pregnant with us, then she sold this business. But at the same time, also my dad was an entrepreneur. So he came from banking and then started his like own private family offices that he managed. And I always saw this. So doing those business travels, having those fancy meetings, going to nice events, and all this entrepreneurial hustle. I really enjoyed it, seeing that as a kid, and I was always saying, okay, I really want to become exactly like that. So I would say, always exposed to this entrepreneurial environment. I really found it fascinating from the early days on, and that's, I guess, what created this entrepreneurial drive in me, that I also just see this as the only option for me in a professional environment once I'm grown up.
Yeah. So what kind of impact do you think that had on you, generally speaking, being around your parents that have obviously grown and built businesses? What do you think the biggest impact was on you, generally speaking?
So in terms of personality, I guess seeing also that hard work is required to achieve anything. Like you cannot just expect, if you're smart, that the success will fall into your hands. So I really saw that it also comes with a lot of downsides. So my dad, for example, he was traveling, let's say 80% of the year, so we barely could see him. Always somewhere in Asia. So this definitely shaped me in a way that I understood early on that you really need to make sacrifices and fully dedicate your life and all your motivation to this startup or to this company that you're working on to make it a success. But at the same time, it also showed me that hard work pays off. And this kind of gives you the ultimate motivation to keep going on what you're doing and actually also getting the thing started. Because in the beginning, it's mostly about, and I still see that here at Brainamics, it's mostly about getting stuff done, right? So you can strategize a lot, you can brainstorm a lot, but in the end, what really counts is doing stuff, starting about something. It's okay to fail a lot, to make a lot of mistakes in the beginning. I think that's inevitable, except you're like a serial founder who has a ton of experiences. But that's really important to not just talk about what you want to do, think about what you want to do, but actually doing it.
So you guys have been in business for what, 14 months now, 15 months?
Yeah, so that's what it says on LinkedIn. So we actually founded the company in March this year. Before that, it was more like a side hustle, I would say. So we started researching the topic, doing the customer discovery, developing the product for almost 1 year, a little bit less than a year. Then we saw, okay, there's actually a huge interest on the customer side. At the same time, we saw that investors were proactively contacting us and were also interested in investing. And kind of this combination showed us, hey, we have really something nice going on here. And that's when we decided to go all in, founded the company, got the investment, and so full time on it since March this year. So it's only basically half a year that we are on the company now.
Wow. Okay, cool. Because looking at your background, I think the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things about you, Philip, is that you've not come from, I think this is probably fair to say, like a traditional kind of background from an ML AI founder space, right? So, because you worked at Audi for a bit as an area manager, then you was at FinAuto in business development. So, how did all of that come to pass, and how did all of that work with you meeting Vlad, and what was the kind of starting point there?
Yeah, I mean, all the experiences that I had in the past were really diverse, right? So I was also in the consulting for some time. I was in business development and startups. Then I had this very, very important role in my life at Aldi, where I was area manager. Learned a lot about humans, how humans think and how to interact with them, and also how to lead them and manage them. But how it came to me meeting Vlad is basically not really connected. So I just at some point decided, okay, it's not fulfilling what I'm doing at Aldi or any other job. So I was really pushing into an environment where I can be exposed to an entrepreneurial community. And for me, that was Munich. So that's why I chose the Technical University of Munich to do a master degree, because I knew there's a lot of really successful startups, a lot of really successful and smart people that I could team up with. And exactly that plan worked out quite well because I quickly met Vlad. And the passion for, let's say, the more subject-related topic of our startup, which is, of course, besides neuroscience, also AI and machine learning, it developed over time while we worked on a project. So it was not the case that I was actively looking for an AI or ML use case that we could work on, but it kind of fell into my hands. So it was more the founder, so Vlad, that I met, who fascinated me and convinced me to work with him on this topic. And then I also got exposed more to the topic and got excited about it and all the opportunities that come along. So it was more the other way around. So I got into this topic through the founder and not the other way around.
Yeah. Because we're kind of skirting around Brainamics and what you guys do a little bit, right? So maybe for the listeners, do you want to give like a high level overview of what Brainamics is, does, and the business idea in general?
All right. So on a very high level, Brainamics is a neurotech startup, and we developed a software that can extract emotions directly from the human brain. So what we do is we use EEGs. They are called electroencephalograms, and they basically measure the electrical brain activity of a human. And then we developed a software that can translate and correlate the EEG signal with actual emotions. So that's on a very high level explained the technology that we have. And the use case that we have as a starting point, at least as a commercial starting point, is in the gaming industry. So as you might know, there's something called play testing, where the game developers try to better understand the user experience and the psychology of their gamers before they launch the game. And normally they use surveys or verbal interviews to better understand exactly those user experience topics. But the feedback that they can get there is extremely limited and subjective. And our technology comes in quite handy when it comes to this play testing, because we can objectively show them exactly what the players felt for every single second of the gameplay. So we really elevate this entire play testing, which is an integral part of game development, to a completely new level. And that's what really gave us a nice head start as a startup, also from a business perspective, in this gaming space.
Man, that is beyond fascinating. So how does it, like, so say if I'm a gamer and I'm playing, I don't know what games you're kind of working with at the moment, but I mean, I'm not a gamer, so the only one I know is like Call of Duty, right? So but let's say I'm playing Call of Duty. How does it look from a physical perspective? Like if you're in the room, how does that all look?
Yeah. So we test all different kinds of games. So from mobile gaming, you can imagine Candy Crush Saga, those super casual, relaxing games, to Call of Duty, which are very, very competitive shooter games. We test everything. How does the testing look like? So you sit in a very, very isolated lab environment, basically, either on the phone or either on the console or on the PC. And while you're playing the game, the only special thing is that we also measure the brain activity. So you have the EEG on your head, and that's basically it. So you just play the game, we record the brain data, and afterwards we extract the emotions from that data. The experience itself, I would say, if the game is good and immersive, then you don't really see the difference. So when I tried it out in the beginning, of course, as well, like some games that I really enjoyed, could play for 3-4 hours, and I completely forgot about the fact that I'm in a testing situation and that I have the EEG on my head. So it really depends on the game, of course. Bad games might fail on that aspect, but that's roughly the setting that we have.
Right. So what parts of the brain are you actually analysing, or is it the brain in its entirety?
Yeah, so there are different parts of the brain that get activated for different emotions. So it's always neurotransmitters that get emitted for certain emotions. For example, dopamine mostly gets emitted in the frontal lobe, which is here in the forehead. So the electrodes that are located on the EEG in this area detect the electrical activity once you have this boost in positivity. And we also did some research on where are the optimal locations for the electrodes in order to cover the most broad spectrum of emotions that are interesting, especially for the gaming use case. So we made some small adjustments to the standard distribution of the EEG electrodes to better fit it to our use case. But in general, it covers basically the entire head.
Gotcha. So what emotions, and sorry if these are like really ignorant basic questions, but like what emotions are you actually looking to analyze? What's the criteria and the KPIs that you work with?
Yeah, so we are working with a psychological model called valence and arousal. So it basically is a model to classify emotions, and it's 2 dimensions. One dimension is called valence and the other one arousal. And the valence is basically a measure of the hedonic pleasure that you felt during this moment, and the arousal is a measure of how strongly your brain, your nervous system was activated. So how intensely do you perceive this emotion right now? So it's 2-dimensional, and you can imagine it like a 2-dimensional coordinate system. And on this 2-dimensional coordinate system, there are multiple different emotions in each quadrant. For example, if you have a very high activity, like a very high arousal and a very low valence, so you're really negative and really aroused, this is very frustrated and angry. And on the other hand, if you are extremely positive and have a slightly higher arousal than average, then you are excited. So there's like different labels for each combination of valence and arousal, and that's how we map and classify the emotions.
Gotcha. Right. So how accurate is the product right now? Like, are there any percentage or like things where you can say, oh, this is a quantifiable number that we can work to comparatively to? Well, I guess that's probably difficult to compare to the old methods, right? Because as you say, that was more of a physical, subjective, survey-based thing. So it might be difficult to compare those directly. But have you got any accuracy figures that you can say, right, well, this is what you can quantifiably see?
Yeah. So we basically replicate our production pipeline in a validation pipeline in order to determine this accuracy numbers. And what we do is we take 80% of our training data, train our models with this data, and then we let the models predict the remaining 20% of our training data that they never saw. And there at the moment we have an accuracy a little bit above 80%. So it's not perfect yet, but it's still really, really high, so that the game designers can rely on the insights that we generate and work with the data.
Gotcha. Okay, fine. So I guess I mean, this might be not a challenging question, I guess, but it'd be good to get your opinion on this or your narrative here. What's the ultimate goal for you guys? Because obviously, if you're analysing brain data to understand how playable games are, is the end goal to make games more playable, right? I know it sounds like a pretty basic question, but how far down that route are you expecting to go? Because games are pretty addictive already, right? So is it like you're aiming for hyper addiction, hyper enjoyment on the games right now, or like what are you actually trying to achieve with the customers that you work with and the games that they produce?
It's basically about optimizing the user experience. So it's definitely not about making the games more addictive, because the more addictive the game doesn't mean that it's better and more fun for the gamer. So we are not focusing on addiction at all, obviously. So we could also optimize our models to detect the addiction and try to optimize on that with our customers. But that obviously is not only ethically very questionable, but also not the goal of a good game studio at all. So it's really about making sure that they have a very diverse emotional journey. So a game is not good if you're happy all the time. You need to have a very diverse journey from being sad to being frustrated to being excited to being happy. It needs to be like a very broad spectrum of emotion that is covered in your gameplay. And that's something that we can easily measure and give our customers, so the game studios, the insights. So it also always depends on the genre. So let's say a typical game loop that any casual mobile game, for example, wants to elicit is this challenge where you have a puzzle that you try to solve. You fail 2-3 times, so you get close to being frustrated. But then you finally solve this problem, so you have this moment of success and you feel rewarded until the next challenge starts. So you have this, let's say it's a flow state between being slightly frustrated and being rewarded. And this is something that we've observed that works quite well and correlates strongly with good KPIs. And that's where we try to help them. So to make this good user experience, to have more fun and a better gameplay overall for the customers, but definitely not to make it more addictive. But when it comes down to where we want to get with this technology in itself, so maybe let's stay in the gaming space for now. So definitely we want to move outside of the gaming at some point and enter other verticals as well. But with this type of neurofeedback that we generate right now, and make it easier to access also for game studios, at some point we at least have the dream, and that's our vision, to enable adaptive experiences in games. So that means when you play, for example, a VR game, at some point in the VR headset there will be electrodes integrated, so an EEG that basically measures your brain activity while you're playing the game. So when we then detect that you get too bored, we can just spice up the gameplay by spawning more enemies, by adapting the audio or the visual design to make it just more interesting and immersive and exciting for the gamer. So that's really completely elevating the way that we perceive games right now and how we experience games to a completely different level, because every single gameplay will be basically the maximum entertainment that you could imagine. And that's where we see our technology evolving to in the gaming space.
So I guess because that was one of when I looked at you guys, I was like, oh, if you work directly with customers, what's the kind of sell to them? And it would be about performance increases of some sort, right? And I was like, oh, is the end game to try and make these games as addictive as possible so people just don't leave them? But what you're saying is, or what I've heard is, it's not necessarily about the addictiveness. It's about the breadth and depth of the game from an emotional standpoint, and being able to optimize not just a particular emotion, but the vast array of emotions that we've got, which then therefore make a game more enjoyable and real. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's the entire idea of the product. And I mean, there's also some additional benefits to it. So for example, the customers get to see if smaller things, like if the UI works, if the players understand what to do, if the target audience that they might imagine for their game actually fits to the game they made. So there are multiple other benefits that come along with the testing that we do. But the major goal is, as you said, to create the most enriching emotional experiences possible in the game.
So where does the machine learning step in? Because obviously you're analyzing the brain data, and then what happens after that?
Okay, so after we measure the EEG signals during the playtest, after that, the machine learning comes in. So we first pre-process, of course, the EEG signal. That's probably the most challenging step. And then the machine learning models basically correlate the pre-processed EEG signal with the emotional states. So that's when the machine learning part happens.
Gotcha. And then that feedback to customers would be about prediction of their emotional state based on machine learning algorithms, right?
Exactly. So the outcome in the end is, again, this valence and arousal for every single second of the gameplay. And then we visualize that in multiple different ways. So on heat maps, we render it into the videos of the gameplay. And there's different ways of how we visualize that depending on the use case. But the machine learning part is really in between the analysis part and the collection of the EEG data during the playtest. So in between, this machine learning magic happens. But in the analysis of the results itself, there's no machine learning involved anymore.
Jesus Christ, man. What a cool use case for ML and AI. It must be so fun to work on what you're working on right now.
Definitely. I mean, it's really exciting. It's not only because of the product that is really innovative and sounds amazing. It's also the entire journey of a startup. So that's me speaking again as an entrepreneur who really enjoys the entire process and journey. But I think really the combination of an exciting product and this exciting startup journey, which is also exciting if you have a boring product, I think, this really makes it super, super interesting and super nice to live through that.
So you're, I mean, looking back at the journey now, what have been the big challenges from the get-go, and what have been your dark moments so far? Because it's not easy to start and scale up a business, especially when you're talking about a use case that, I mean, maybe you can correct me here, but I don't know any other companies in Germany that are doing anything kind of similar to this. So maybe worldwide there are, but I'm not aware of them. So I'd imagine there's not really a blueprint that you can kind of copy or get much inspiration from, right? So, I mean, looking back now, what have been the big challenges around building Brainamics, and what have been the dark moments?
All right. I mean, in general, I would say starting a business and especially growing fast in the beginning, which is the case for us now, you're basically in a constant crisis mode. It's of course nice to grow, but you're always having problems and you're always trying to solve them as good as possible. But you never have enough time to solve your problems, and you're in a constant crisis mode. But I would call it's like a positive crisis. So it's a good crisis to have, basically. So it's hard to say the darkest moment that we had. I could not think of one that comes to my mind now, because there are many along the way. But in general, I think it's the most challenging part really is to, at least for us as an unexperienced entrepreneurship team, the toughest thing is to find a good product market fit. So we have this technology, it sounds super nice, it works well. How do we translate that now into a product that actually solves problems for our customers? So this is really, really challenging. And we invested a lot of time until we understood our first customers. How do they use our product? And also, what do we need to change in order to give them even more benefit from using our product? And this is really, on the one hand, time consuming. On the other hand, you can completely run into the wrong direction if you, for example, rely too much on the feedback of one customer, because this might be just the case for this one customer, but not for the other 2,000 customers you might have. I think experience is super crucial. And since we don't have that experience, we already several times realized, okay, we are running into the wrong direction. So I would say there it's the most crucial quality of a startup founder, to be able to quickly realize if you're on the wrong track and align it respectively. Then that's really, I think, what made us what enables us to grow relatively quick, because we quickly realize if we are on the wrong path, and respectively then align or adjust the course.
And you touched on product market fit, and well, and earlier on today, different potential use cases for this, right? So
Yeah.
was it always gaming that you guys set out to start with, or was it originally that, and now there's potentially some other options where you can apply this to?
Yes, so it originated in gaming, the idea. So Vlad once participated in a hackathon. So Vlad, my CTO, in a hackathon about BCIs, and there was someone from a gaming company, a huge gaming company, and he gave a presentation on how you can actually make games more immersive using AI, and in the future also using BCIs. And that's where the idea originated. So we always came from the gaming space, but we quickly realized with the technology that there's so many more use cases besides the gaming. So you could think of movie production, you can think of marketing or advertisement clips, like wherever you have a digital user experience that you want to test and optimize, you could use our technology. And for us at the moment, it's really about understanding where is the benefit for the customer the biggest. So that's what we're trying to solve out. So we're running now pilot projects in the advertisement space, in the movie production space. And based on the feedback that we get there, we might decide to enter a new vertical already in the beginning of next year. But the gaming vertical is for sure a really nice product market fit. We're still improving our product towards some specific game studios where we see the most potential. But yeah, we still want to enter new verticals rather sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about different ways that could be applied too, right? So like music could be another one where you could just optimize the emotional response to like music. I don't know if that would be a hugely valuable thing. I don't know, maybe it would, but yeah, I mean, so I guess maybe you've been asked this before, but like ethically though, do you think, or maybe not even ethically, maybe philosophically, do you think you'll get to a stage where everything's a bit manufactured rather than like, how can I explain this? Like a real, like, you know, if someone creates a movie that absolutely hits it home, I don't know, one of the Tarantino movies, right?
Yeah.
There's not been anything done to modify or manufacture your emotional response to those things, right? It's just purely the guy's a genius from a filmmaking perspective. I think he is. He's a genius filmmaker. So that's like pure talent, right? Yeah. Whereas if you're using things to kind of manufacture and understand emotional responses, especially in a digital sense and something creative like filmmaking or music or whatever, where does it become the program that's writing or the software and the product that's, you know, creating the product, the external talent and human talent? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. So in the end, the artistic or creative expression, let's say of Tarantino in his movies, of course, is like what makes it nice, what makes it enjoyable to watch. And it's similar for gaming as well, or for music. There's always this creative expression of the artist that entertains us. But we are not seeing ourselves as a tool provider that kind of removes this creative expression of an artist. Because in the end, like the game director or the producer of a game or the creative director is also an artist. Who just expresses this idea of how his game should look like. We just help them to fine-tune it, to make it even more enjoyable. But the core user experience and the core entertainment still comes from this creative expression. There are some, let's say, genres in the mobile gaming space especially, which are becoming more and more this manufactured experience, right? So people know, okay, match free, like Candy Crush Saga, it works out quite well. People like that. So there's basically gaming factories that produce hundreds of different variations of this game mechanic. So that's, as you said, it's more like a manufactured experience. But when it comes to PC or console AAA games, it's always a huge creative expression of one genius, of one artist, which then can later on be tested and fine-tuned if it really elicits the right emotions or the good emotions in their target audience. So we, as I said, we see ourselves as the enabler to fine-tune experiences, but not to manufacture them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would have been my not biggest pushback, but it would have been like, oh, how much of that creative process would you take away add to, right? But Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So, I mean, the next step for you guys then, because obviously it seems like you're going down the gaming route quite heavily now. And you mentioned that there are definitely some other use cases about filmmaking and stuff that are potential options for this to have impact in. What else is there outside of the creative piece? Is there anything more... don't know what the word is, but is there anything outside of the kind of creative landscape that this could be quite impactful for?
Definitely, yes. So our very, very long-term vision is basically to create a brain co-pilot, which enables any human to use the devices such as a smartphone by thinking, basically. So you would not use as a brain-computer interface your hands anymore, but your brain. And that's still many, many years down the road, especially considering that we are, as a company, focusing on non-invasive EEGs. Neuralink, on the other hand, for example, produces the invasive EEGs. That's, from an ethical standpoint, also questionable. But yeah, so we are really focusing on those non-invasive EEGs. And since this is a much, much more challenging field due to the noise that is created by everything in between the brain and the electrodes of the EEG, we still have many years down the road that we need to optimize the models, that we need to collect more training data, better understand how we can extract and filter out the noise from the relevant information of the brain signal to make this brain co-pilot work. But that's the ultimate goal, to really facilitate the way that humans interact with machines, and not being obliged to undergo surgery and implant a chip in your brain or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true. There's a statistic in my mind. I can't remember if this is legit or not, but I'm sure on some of the test models for the Neuralink stuff, didn't 40% of the pigs that they put the Neuralink in, didn't they die from like brain infections within like 2 months or something like that?
Yeah, I don't recall exact numbers, but I've read this article as well. But yeah, I cannot recall how many percent those were, but there were some problems. Yeah. So I mean, it's very, very early stage, this technology, right? So it's not very scientifically proven what are going to be the effects on the participants of those studies. But on the other hand, there's also very, very strong proof already of the use that can come along with that. So some of the studies at MIT show that paralyzed people can type. I don't recall the exact number, but I think it was like 90 words per minute just by thinking, right?
Wow.
And at a pretty decent accuracy. And this is really impressive because it enables people who have no access to body movement, to anything, basically. It really gives them a new life and changes everything for them. And that's a huge vision, and that's a nice vision to work on.
Man, that would be amazing. I mean, the impact that you could have there would be astronomical, right? But as you say, that's a huge project, and that's going to take some time. So what's the kind of like timeline that you guys are working towards with that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very wild and rough estimations, but we hope to be able to move closer to this co-pilot by 2030. So the thing about neurotechnology, especially non-invasive, it's still in its infancy. Although the technology has been around for many years, I mean, from a hardware perspective, it's really simple. It's not rocket science. The problem is really making it usable and building the solid software and the machine learning models around that. This is really still in its infancy, and we got lucky to find a use case, which is basically a neuromarketing use case, where we can already build a solid business, generate revenues with neurotechnology and machine learning. And building on that, we hope to be able to do more and more research and development that brings us closer, step by step, to the long-term vision. But yeah, it's hard to say. Our wild guess is 2030.
Yeah, man. Honestly, it's. I hope you guys nailed it because, it sounds fascinating, and it's interesting to speak to someone and a business that's doing something that I've not really heard of in Germany before. Most times when I speak to people on the podcast or just in general, there's usually like a combination of like a handful of companies that are kind of doing it in slightly different ways, like autonomous drive, for example, or, documentation, reading and, whatever. But honestly, I don't know any other companies in Germany that are doing anything like what you guys are working on. So it's fascinating to hear some like interesting, unique stories. So what happens now then? What's the next step for you guys, and what you're trying to achieve over the next kind of short term 12, 18 months?
All right, yeah, so in the very few next weeks, for us, a very crucial topic is closing the next fundraising round. So we already raised at the beginning of the startup, so half a year ago. Now we do a bigger round. Hope to be able to disclose some good news there soon. So stay tuned on that. Besides that, we are, as I said, looking into new verticals. Might be that we expand to that already in the beginning of next year. And of course, we want to also expand our capabilities of providing more diverse demographics in terms of testers for our customers. So right now, since we are based in Munich, we're geographically limited for when it comes to the testing where we can do it. So we are also looking into setting up offices in different countries. So the US would be a first nice expansion target, since many of the games are targeted at US Americans, so that we are also able to test there. So that's something that's on the agenda for next year. And besides that, always further iterating on our product, because we're still far away from delivering like the perfect product for every gaming studio. And this simply takes time, because there's also no like benchmark or no product that we can use as a orientation, because we're building something completely new that has never been there before, which makes it even harder than developing a normal product or a normal tool. Also considering then the complexity of the technology that we're working with, this makes it quite hard and time consuming to create a AAA product. So that's why we cannot just say, like, for example, a simple tool, let's say Calendly, they can quickly create it. It's a simple tool and brings great value. For us, it's a bit more complicated, so it takes more time.
Yeah, so the typical demographic of the people that listen to the podcast is mid-20s to mid-30s, data science, ML, STEM type people within Germany. I'd imagine you guys, talent is obviously super important for you, right? So if there's someone listening now that would want to reach out to you, who would those people be? Like, what types of profiles do you want to speak to in Germany? What do they look like?
Yeah, good question. So for us, definitely the juice of the company is the tech team. So we have a very diverse skill set, and we need that diverse skill set because, as I said, we cover from neuroscience to data science, machine learning, like many different fields that are not connected with each other. So we are actively always looking for data scientists who have good expertise in machine learning and deep learning, ML ops, and especially now, since we're also developing a product, we need typical software engineers who have an affinity for machine learning, but are also good full stack developers, basically. So that's kind of the profiles that we are actively looking for all the time after the fundraising, probably with more intensity. But for now, like our tech team consists of 6 full-time people, mostly from the spaces of neurotechnology, data science, machine learning, and then also the software engineers.
All the buzzwords. So are you closing, is it a Series A or are you closing the seed round?
Yeah, we call it seed round. I mean, in the end, you could theoretically also call it pre-seed. I didn't understand yet how startups come up with titles of their fundraising rounds. But so we did one round in the beginning of the year. Now we do the second round. So for me, it's a seed round, yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, look, Philipp, I honestly wish you the best of luck with building Brainamics, because number one, it's just a very cool idea, generally speaking. But then number two, the impact that you can have way outside gaming is obviously very, very apparent. So if anyone's listening to this now and they want to reach out to Philipp, please do so. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. And it's awesome to hear some new exciting shit going on in Munich, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Luke, for the invitation. Pleasure to talk to you.